Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs. Buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sung-Hoon Kim, and I'd like to welcome you to the International Civil Aviation Organization's 40th Assembly SkyTalks. This is day 6, session number 8, and it's one of the 68 presentations we have for you from aviation industry professionals. So I would like to have you go check out our ICAO SkyTalks channel in YouTube for more information. Right now, we continue our discussion on TRIP, that's Traveller Identification Programme theme, and we're going to talk about a tool to help you, and the title is the ICAO Public Key Directory. Please welcome Dr. Ciaran Carolan, Program Officer.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you, Mr. Kim, for the introduction. So today, I want you, for the beginning, to imagine yourself for a moment, perhaps some of you in the audience are, but imagine yourself as a border guard. And imagine that my name, at least for the first few minutes of this presentation, is not Ciaran Carolan, as just introduced. It's actually John Murphy, as you see on the screen here. And let me tell you that I'm actually Canadian. So you immediately look to me as a border guard and you say, that's a ridiculous assertion. And of course, you'd be right in that. But how do you know that? Well, one, perhaps you know that Mr. Kim is never wrong, so he did not introduce me with the wrong name. Or perhaps you're attuned to accents and you have noticed that that's not a Canadian accent that gentleman is speaking by. So these would be two bases of understanding that I am not John Murphy, as I'm attesting to. But both of these assertions are based on previous knowledge or, in fact, interaction with the person in person. And just bear that in mind as we move through the first couple of slides. Of course, when you're at a border control as well, one of those documents that's actually there to avoid the need of me attesting who I am, telling you that I'm John Murphy, and one of those documents that's meaning that you don't need to be an expert in accents and languages of the world is the passport. And of course, a heavily evolved document based on the work of ICAO for many, many decades at this stage. And here's a passport with my name. Of course, it's a copy of my passport. And you can see on that passport my name, Ciaran Carolan, as introduced. And if I present this to you stating that I am John Murphy, you're going to immediately say, that is incorrect. That does not match with the details in the visible zone of the document. So please tell me who you really are, and I'm going to treat you who you really are. But look a little bit more closely at this particular image and look at the bottom section of the passport, what we call the machine readable zone of the passport. And you can see in this particular instance that it has been changed. So this zone of text with chevrons, etc., a little bit of gobbledygook, perhaps you would call it, but it's essentially a text field, and it's the area that machines typically read to deduce the same biographic data as is already on the passport. And if I present this very, very simplistically altered passport to you with that data, not to you personally, but to a machine, at the very, very simplest level, this data at the very bottom, this machine readable zone, will tell you that this is John Murphy, who is Canadian, presenting to you. So, have I fooled the machine while I'm at border control simply by replacing these two lines of text? Well, no, it's a little bit more complex than that. At least in more modern electronic passports, we have a chip embedded in the passport, the electronic chip. And this encodes both the biographic information that you see physically present on the passport and the biometric information, particularly the facial image that you also see embedded in the passport. So when I come to the machine, I'm not only presenting the information that's in the machine readable zone, in that text on the passport itself physically, but also the details that are on the chip. Now, what I can tell you is altering the chip and putting a chip onto the passport is a little bit more difficult than simply replacing the two lines. But in itself, it's not an impossible task. Just to give you an idea of how easy it is, I have a passport that my 5-year-old prepared here just before the presentation. You can see inside is exactly the data that you see on the slide. And on the back, I helped her with this, of course. I have encoded the details of a chip using the standard format that is present in document 9303 of ICAO. So there and then, let's say your border, I would say in certain borders of the world, with this information, if the border is not properly set up and is not using the PKD or similar databases, as I'll explain in a moment, this type of very, very simplistic passport could get through. So my arguments to you initially would be creating a fraudulent passport, even with electronic information, is child's play, or close to child's play. That's the assertion I will make. Of course, it's not that easy, as I'm making out, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. But if I am presenting a passport like this, and I am not interacting with you, of course, if I'm interacting with you as a border guard with this, you're going to stop me immediately. But if I am going to, for example, an automated border control gate, I'm not necessarily, most likely I'm not interacting with you in person. I give you this document, the facial image that's encoded on the chip, on this card on the back, the facial image that you can see on the document, and the facial image that I'm presenting to you live in person, all match. We have a facial image match, we have a biographic information match, and the automated border control gate will say to you, please proceed. And of course, that would be a bad decision on the part of your border control if I am saying I'm John Murphy, because clearly I am not, as you've been introduced. But there is one element that I haven't spoken about yet, and this is the key. And this is the fact that that chip is electronically signed. It's digitally signed. So that when I have made this chip here, I cannot digitally sign that chip because I do not have the certificates and the keys to execute a digital signature as a Canadian authority. So this is something that I cannot do because I do not have the private keys of the Canadian authorities that issue passports. So when we're moving more into the situations nowadays where we're moving towards automation, the use of automated border controls like I speak about, etc., the key question that is arising to border guards and to authorities and to ministries, etc., who are dealing with border management, the key question is what's on the screen here. It's not who signed the document physically. That was a question that was perhaps asked decades ago or in more recent years even. But more and more the question that's being asked is who signed the document electronically. In other words, what is the digital signature on that chip and is it legitimate? And this is where the PKD that I'm speaking about today, the Public Key Directory, comes in. So the Public Key Directory is essentially a directory of certificates of public keys, as the name suggests, that are associated with the electronic signature that I've spoken about. There is a hierarchy of certificates of keys associated with document preparation, document issuance, and ePassport validation. Subsequently, they're shown on the slide here. So there is a CSCA certificate. It's what we call a root certificate, or you could imagine it as the anchor certificate, as shown on the slide here. And this is the certificate that's issued very, very infrequently by the authority and essentially underpins all of the document issuance from that authority for a number of years. And based on this certificate, there are a number of document signer certificates that are issued more regularly, and these are used to sign, electronically sign, of course, various batches of the passports that are issued by that country or by that entity. And this is all encoded in the document security object, which is part of the chip on that ePassport. So when an ePassport is issued, there is a digital signature applied through this hierarchy of certificates shown on the screen here. And when I present my passport, and hopefully it's a real passport, and it's not the passport that I have in my pocket, it's a real passport, the validation steps go so that I present that, and the certificate that has been used to sign the chip that I am presenting is compared against the certificates that hopefully you have available, document signer certificates, perhaps CSCA certificates, and there is a confirmation that yes, this digital signature that's present is a digital signature of a certified authority, a governmental authority that is entitled to issue these passports, and not a single person or an entity who is creating fraudulent passports. So again, this is key, particularly when we're dealing with automation. Now, the Public Key Directory is essentially what's shown on the lower diagram on the right here. The Public Key Directory is a convenient, and as I'll explain later, cost-effective means of sharing the certificates, particularly, and I'll explain on the next slide, the document signer certificates. So as I mentioned, these are issued quite regularly, in some instances every few months. And it is quite a challenge to keep up to date on the certificates that all the countries of the world, 193 ICAO member states, are issuing on such a regular basis. And if you're relying on knowledge of these certificates and awareness of these certificates being exchanged on a bilateral basis, as shown on the upper right here, you can see that very, very quickly this becomes unmanageable. You have to have all these member states talking to each other on a regular, several monthly basis, exchanging certificates, and it's very, very hard to do. What the ICAO PKD is, it's a centralized repository of these document signer certificates that provides the location where all of the member states of the PKD can go and download all of the certificates at the same time. And of course, those passport issuers who are actually members equally upload their data on a regular basis to make sure it's available to all the member states. So rather than this mishmash mesh of things on the upper right, we have something of the hub and spoke design that's on the bottom right. And obviously that makes things much, much easier. So as I mentioned, it's in the ICAO PKD currently document signer certificates, these certificates that are in the middle of the hierarchy I showed on the previous slide. But in fact, it's even a little bit more complex when we introduce, and I'll just briefly touch on this, the fact that sometimes maybe documents have been issued that should be revoked, or a certain batch of passports has been lost for whatever reason, or for any particular reason like that, there is a need to revoke some of the passports or revoke some of the certificates that have already been issued. And this is where certificate revocation lists, CRLs, come in. So in fact, it's not just I issue something and it's done. It's in fact, sometimes I notify that there's a new key in use, and I need to go and actually take that away and say it has been revoked for whatever reason. So CRLs need to be uploaded and downloaded regularly as well. Now, up until now, the CSCA certificates, which are the root certificates or the anchor certificates on the previous slide, they have been, they are up until now and will continue to be exchanged bilaterally with ICAO. These are the anchor certificates that are issued very, very infrequently. And we get those through diplomatic protocols, and these are the foundation for us ensuring that the document signer certificates that we get in every instance are trustable. So we have that trust anchor that we can use at all times, and we provide assurance to all the ICAO member states, the PKD member states, that what is in our database can be trusted. But in the future, very, very near future, in fact, we intend to also issue a master list. In other words, a list of these CSCA certificates. So as well as the document signer certificates, states who are members of the PKD will have an additional list that they can use to further corroborate what they already know and provide further trust in what they're doing. So in other words, we're providing really a one-stop shop. We already are, and increasingly so in the future, that is the case. So let me emphasize again that we're not static in what we're doing. Currently, it's an exceptional resource, and in the future, we're adding value through the introduction of new features such as the ICAO master list. So when you bring it all together with the document signer certificates and the CSCA certificates and the CRLs, what we have is a key resource. Not only should I add for the document checkers, and those are who I've really spoken about in this presentation up until now, those who are perhaps at the border, who need to verify the authenticity and the veracity of the document that's being presented, but also for document issuers. If you are an entity that issues passports at national levels, you're an authority that issues passports, you want those passports to be robust to fraud. And if they're electronic passports, you want to make sure that other states are able to verify your document. So in other words, you want your certificates, public certificates I might add, out there amongst the community. So joining the PKD and uploading your information regularly is a mechanism to do so. You also would like, I would assume, your citizens to be able to access facilitation measures, to access things like automated border controls that I mentioned in an early slide. So again, by issuing electronic passports and then joining the PKD and uploading your data, you can facilitate the travel of your citizens, which is the advantage, I think, of everybody in your country, and something that should be talked about. So generally, when we speak about aviation security and facilitation, we talk about two sides of the coin in some ways, that maybe we boost security, we diminish facilitation, or vice versa. But generally, the PKD, like many of these more modern facilitation measures, is actually boosting security as well. So we're boosting security and facilitation simultaneously. And hence, I would argue, and it's not just me, as I'll explain in the next slide, the whole community believes that this PKD is a vital resource and one that should be used to the fullest extent possible. I mentioned the community believes in this. How do I know this? Well, this is Annex 9 to the Chicago Convention. is annexed on facilitation, and therein there are three recommended practices that I would like to bring forward in the context of the PKD. The first two, really at the heart of those, is what I've just explained, that both those who are issuing electronic travel documents and those who are checking electronic travel documents at the borders should join the PKD and use the information therein to in their issuance procedures or in their validation procedures. And the third one harks back to the story that I introduced in the beginning. It's that those utilizing automated border control systems should, in particular, use the information available from the PKD to validate electronic travel documents. So again, when we're using ABCs and there is perhaps not a human interaction, a physical touching, a physical inspection of the security features on the document, then the PKD comes even more into its own. Let me give you just a status update on this, and I'm happy to say this slide is out of date as of today. So I was going to say to you as of this morning that there are 69 members of the PKD, and that would have been true as of last night at the stage I was going home. But we actually have a 70th member joined just this morning. It's Belarus, so apologies to anybody from Belarus who's watching who sees that their country is not green on this slide. I didn't update it today. It would have been a bit of an ordeal. But in fact, we have 70 participants in the PKD. It's growing by several every year. And of course, it should grow significantly more in the coming years. But 70 is an increase year on year on what we've had. And you can see geographic distribution is quite good. There are areas of the world still where there's work to be done. In yellow on this particular slide are those countries that issue electronic passports but do not currently partake, are not members of the PKD. And particularly for those countries, I would argue that they are not fully realizing the added value of electronic passports because they've issued electronic passports and then other countries do not have access to the certificates to verify them, and their citizens in many cases will not have access to the facilitation measures offered by other countries for that reason. So currently 70, still a long way to go to reach 193, but the argument I'm making today is that we should reach that as soon as possible. Let me just briefly say that the argument for increasing the number beyond 70 is growing. Why is this? Well, it's because there's new developments that are coming in the coming years, maybe slowly, maybe more quickly, we'll have to see. But the developments such as the digital travel credential mean that we will be increasingly moving away from the physical paper passport, more towards the chip-based element. That will not be possible if member states and countries are not using the PKD or at least having access to the certificates in some other way. So as we move to digital travel credential, in fact, we cannot do so until certificate sharing is improved compared to what it is. Electronic visas, similarly, if you're verifying passport, an electronic passport, you should use the certificates. Equally, if you're verifying an electronic visa, you should have the certificates associated with that to make sure it is an authentic document. And finally, perhaps a little bit more technical, but the logical data structure 2. This is the future initiative whereby authorities, let's say border crossing points, will not only be able to read information from the chip, but also write information onto the chip. For example, data regarding border crossings or data regarding visas. Again, if an authority has written something on the chip, when the next authority reads that, they are going to have to verify that it is authentic. And again, that's going to require some form of PKD, probably the PKD that I'm speaking about today. Is it hard to join the PKD? No, it is not. It's actually very easy. The steps are shown on the screen. You simply inform us through formal documents signed by a representative of your member states, the notice of participation and notice of registration. You effect a fee, and then you're not finished, I'm afraid. That's not where it goes. When you've paid the fee and you've joined, you need to connect, and you need to upload your information, and you need to download information regularly and have processes for doing so. But essentially, to get started, it is very simple. Send us the notice of participation, notice of registration, pay the fee, and we will work with you thereafter to make sure that everything works as seamlessly as it can. What are the fees I'm speaking about? The ICAO PKD is not a profit-making exercise in any way. It is a cost-sharing exercise. The costs are distributed amongst the participant member states. That means one thing in particular that's very, very important. As more and more member states join, the costs become lower. So I'm showing to you a fee in total of about $25,000 per year. That is less than half of what it was several years ago when we had many, many fewer, or significantly fewer member states. And of course, as we grow further, that will decrease further. Again, we're not making money out of this. It's a matter of just spreading the costs of operation around the member states. And if we reach anything like the number of member states in the ICAO PKD as number of member states in ICAO, these fees will be pretty small, I would say. And relative to what you will spend on the implementation of an ePassport program, it's not much more than a drop in the ocean. May look big on the slide, but considering what countries spend on ePassports, then to not partake in this, I would say, is a mistake. That would be the argument I would make, certainly on the financial grounds. Very, very final point. One thing I haven't mentioned up till now is that aside from getting access to the certificates and being able to upload your information and share that information and facilitate travel for your citizens, joining the PKD community also gives you an access to a range of experts, people who've been working not just on PKD, but electronic travel documents, some of the future initiatives that I mentioned, like LDS2, e-visas, etc., have been led in large part by some of the people in this photo. This is a photo of the last PKD board meeting that was organised in Paris last year. I mentioned the PKD board again because it's very much a community effort. It's something that is led by the member states. ICAO is running it for the member states and on behalf on the member states, and with the strong guidance. In fact, it's led by the board, with ICAO implementing their decisions and supporting them. So you get access to the PKD community, you get access to a range of experts, you meet with these regularly, hopefully, and I think that's another benefit of the PKD initiative that should be mentioned and should be borne in mind. So let me summarize where we are. The question you have to ask yourself when you're dealing with borders, when you're dealing with documents generally, I would say increasingly, is who signed the document electronically. Not physically, it's electronically. That's where we're moving to. This is not a question that's something that you have to think about for the future. This is a need now. Like I show Maslow's hierarchy here, it's not nice to have. I would argue increasingly it's a need to have access to the certificates associated with the electronic signatures on your documents. The ICAO PKD is something that makes this availability and exchange of certificates both convenient and cost effective. And hence I think it's a vital resource that anybody at member state level, anybody involved in this business should consider strongly. I'd be delighted to take any questions. Thank you.
If there are any questions, I'd invite you to step up and ask them. Thank you, Dr. Carolan.
Thank you very much.